Okay, so I think just looking at the numbers, hold on, let's just see. Wait a couple of minutes, we've just gone live.
Takes a few seconds to open that bottle of wine, pour a few glasses. Michael, have you got your first wine poured?
I do, but I've already drank it, so I better pour some more.
Coming right back, I forgot my wine glass, 1 second.
It is cocktail, right? After all.
I thought you were going to be in your backyard.
I was, but my neighbor is hammering his newly put down flagstone, and the sound just,
not so good.
And I can't communicate with him. There's a language issue, so here I am at my desk.
Shall we, Magda? Shall we roll?
Are we?
Are you ready?
Yep.
Yes, we were born.
So welcome, John and Michael, to our virtual toast to Chardonnay on the Saturday night of the i4C that happens every year in person. And this year, as if anyone watched the sessions yesterday, our School of Cool was the at-home edition. And tonight we wanted to just continue to celebrate Chardonnay, get everyone together from around the world, and just raise a glass and have you both take us through some fun, maybe memories of coming to many of the i4Cs in the past, share with us what you're drinking this evening, tasting this evening. And so I just wanted to say, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining tonight on behalf of the i4C board. Also all of the sponsors that helped us put together a weekend of celebration in really quick fashion, and we're super excited. So thank you to VQA Wines of Ontario, the Grape Growers of Ontario, Arterra Wines, Wine and Spirits Magazine, and Black River Cheese, and the LCBO. So thank you to everyone, and I'm just going to do a quick toast. Cheers, kick off the evening, and my glass is disappearing into the vineyard again. Coming straight.
One of those very light, delicate Chardonnays, I see.
I'm drinking Adamo Estates Blanc de Blanc because I thought I would open a bubbly this evening. And welcome and thank you. So I'll leave it to you, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Magda. How retro of you to pull out the coupe. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. Usually I reserve that for scoops of ice cream or sorbet between courses in a meal.
I've been hanging out with the sparkling winos quite a bit.
Oh, I see.
So they brought back the coupe.
Nice. Well, ciao. And welcome to everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. You know what? We'd love to hear from all of you. There's a little chat function there. So if you want to jump in, some of you have already done that. Let us know where you are, who you're with, who's in your bubble, what you're drinking. Are you gathered around the screen in the backyard with a bunch of bottles open? Are you in your living room like I am, or like Michael is, or are you somewhere else, maybe on the deck, on the dock, on a boat, top of a hill, in a valley? I don't know, it doesn't really matter because this is a fun little toast to cool Chardonnay. It is the i4C weekend. We're sad not to all be together, but you know, this is the next best thing, and we can have hundreds of people from all over the place joining, not just from Ontario. So that's the one little benefit of having this Zoom moment. And you know what? You're right, it is too bloody hot for a fedora. I'm gonna take this off. Plus I didn't calculate the need of headphones so I can hear you all clearly. Michael, nice to see you. How are you doing, brother?
I'm good, John. Nice to see you too. I might keep the hat on for just a little bit. Once I get a hat and a scarf on, it's tough for me to shed. It's just sort of what happens to me. But I also want to thank everyone for joining our, what I guess you call our virtual tailgate party. I hope you get your socially distanced barbecue lit. I hope you pour yourself a glass of cool Chardonnay. I've got 4 that we're going to taste, and you got 4 that you're going to taste, and I have, if everybody can see behind me, I have another 10 behind me just in case. But
emergency supply.
Yeah,
good call.
Full supply. And remember that this is an international celebration. It's i4C, 4 C's, and the international part means that we have to recognize that we might just have some people outside of Ontario, outside of Canada joining us. So if you're out there, we're happy to see you. And in the parlance of our times, John and I will have a chin wag, we'll blow smoke, we'll chew the fat, we'll talk a lot without pausing. That's what we do. And I want to apologize to those out there in advance who may miss some inside jokes, because a lot of us have been to many i4C celebrations in the past. We'll probably be bringing up some of those innuendos and things that have happened. You know, what happens at i4C stays at i4C things. But some people
just the daytime stuff and the early evening tasting stuff, correct?
Yes. So lastly, as a continuation of what happened yesterday, for those of you who did see it or tuned in and watched, and those of you who didn't, an incredible panelist discussion in the morning. Matt Kramer, Ian Daggett, Andrew Jefford, and Karen McNeil. Fantastic, fantastic session. And then in the afternoon, John, you were with our good friends Brad Royale, Treve Ring, and Veronique Rivet. And it was
correct.
Very, very special, technical, informative, but fantastic seminar. Thank you so much. But in addition to that, I've really enjoyed the virtual White Oak School of Cool thing. I've really enjoyed the virtual Niagara Airport hangar thing. Even the lunches today, the virtual lunches that I pretended to attend. But I might have to put myself on the i4C planning committee next year to make sure, if we have to do this again virtually next year, that you and I get some virtual oysters and ping pong tomorrow morning.
Oh, I hear you. And
Yeah.
let's just give a little window to the folks who haven't been there, what the original School of Cool looked like. This is the White Oaks Ballroom, where we filled it with about 300 plus trade professionals from all across the province. People paid a decent sum for this, which is not usual in the trade, to actually pay for a tasting. We're used to getting things for free. We have enormous privilege, but for this particular event, because of the quality of the speakers that are flown in from around the world, and the panelists and the winemakers, it has been, I think, one of those moments on the calendar that everyone in the trade in Ontario and from outside of Ontario looks forward to every year. And I had a lot of fun moderating a number of these sessions over the years. It's a pretty intense day, usually with 3 different sessions, each an hour and a half long, and we get deep into what it means to be cool. And maybe we should start there. Michael, what do you think? You attended the online session that we did yesterday when we were trying to define cool, and we promised not too much education, only accidental on the side. But since we're talking about cool climate wines and cool climate Chardonnay in particular, did you agree with what the panel was saying yesterday about the definition of cool, or rather, what is your definition of a cool place to grow grapes?
So I would say that I agreed with a lot of what they had to say. I disagreed with the first blanket statement of there's no real such thing as cool climate. That it's so much more complex.
That was, by the way, that was Matt Kramer, great commentator who said several controversial things over the years when he's been twice keynote speaker at i4C. But yes, at the end of the session yesterday morning, he said, cool climate is kind of meaningless. Explain why that is not true.
Cool climate has much meaning, and that's for sure. And even if, I'll tell you this, wine writers and wine pontificators have to come up with something new to say every time they write. That's what we do. And so it was only 3 or 4 or 5 years ago where we were saying things like Niagara, Ontario, even parts of British Columbia, certainly Quebec and Nova Scotia. These are wine regions that are cool climate. And we were only talking 3 or 4 years ago about them being fringe, about them being on the edge of ripeness, on the edge of being able to ripen grapes, vinifera grapes. And why are we all of a sudden, only 3 or 4 years later, moving so far past that? Well, obviously climate change has a lot to do with that. The changing climate has meant that we have to adjust our thinking. But I think it would be a little superlative, a little bit of hyperbole to go that far already and say that we are not a cool climate region. Yes, this summer is hot as you know what, and the grapes are advanced, and we're probably going to be picking this year in late August and early September. Will be one of the earliest years on records, likely. But it's a much bigger picture than that.
And I would remind everyone that even a hot year in Ontario is still a cool year in so many other parts of the world. And there are lots of different ways for a region to be cool. Yesterday we spoke about latitude, obviously pretty key component of the whole climate matrix. Depending on where you are on the surface of the earth, you're going to have a certain angle of incidence. You're going to have a certain day and seasonal variation, length of day. I can point to the northern end of the Okanagan Valley, for example, at 51 degrees north. That's about as far north as anyone has gone to grow grapes and ripen them successfully. But they get away with that. Why? Because around the solstice, the sun doesn't set till what, 10:30, 10:40 at night. So the length of day is enormous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So very cool climate, but at a very high latitude. But you can also be much closer to the equator. There are some parts, say in Salta in Argentina, where you're at maybe 20, what is the latitude there? 22, 24, 25. So places on the global scale that would generally be too warm, but here you're at 3,000 meters elevation. And as you go up, every 100 meters or so, the average temperature drops by about 1 degree. So you can be cool and close to the equator.
Mm-hmm.
Other things, well, moderating bodies of water, right? If you are next to a cold ocean like South Africa and Australia, parts of Australia, Chile is another great example, right next to the Humboldt Current, or the coast of Western North America in California and Oregon, that part there, very cold current coming out of Antarctica. So onshore areas are significantly moderated, significantly cooled by that cool water. What other things make a region cool?
Oh, there's lots of things. But remember that it was only 3 years ago that Karen McNeil, who was one of our panelists yesterday, said that 1 out of every 3, 1/3 of the coldest wine growing regions that produce quality grapes, let's say, are found in Canada. Okay. So if we're already at a point where we're saying it's not that cool here anymore, then we're doomed, right? So what else? What else? Well, elegance is the number one thing I think that defines cool climate wines.
Tell us about your definition in terms of taste. Forget about all the technical parameters. When you put a wine in your mouth and you say to yourself, this is cool climate, this is warm climate, what is it that's telling me that?
Well, if I just had to sort of say it in lay terms, I would say that when you take a sip of something like an Ontario Cool Climate Chardonnay, you kind of get this green apple bite. You get this flavor and this texture and this quality that snaps back at you. I like to often use the word peak, P-I-Q-U-E. It peaks, it snaps, it's sharp. It speaks to you that way. And then when it's done right, in balance, when all the parts are in beautiful balance, you get this elegance and you get this drift and this length and all the things that come along with that. So I like it when Ontario Chardonnay talks back to me, when it actually bites back. That tells me that I'm drinking something cool.
There's a wine that's saying a whole lot to me right now. I'm going to jump right into the first wine in my glass here. I've got Rose Hall Runs JCR Chardonnay. So I'm in Prince Edward County. This is an area that I'm pretty familiar with. In fact, Dan Sullivan's vineyard, I could almost walk to it from my backyard, from my little dilapidated farmhouse over near Hillier on the western edge of Prince Edward County. And you want to talk cool? Well, I can tell you how cool it is there. Certainly in the winter time. In fact, this is one of the few places in the world, along with, well, Quebec and Armenia, believe it or not, random reference there, where the vines have to be buried in the wintertime because it regularly drops below -22, -23, which is pretty much the limit for vinifera varieties, much beneath that. And that's it. You lose your vines. They don't produce the next year, or they outright die. But of course, it's not the wintertime that makes a wine. It is the summertime. It's the growing season. And what makes Prince Edward County cool is the fact that it's essentially, it's a limestone shelf out in the middle of the lake. So you're surrounded pretty much on all sides. Bay of Quinte in the north, Lake Ontario in the south, and the rest of it, connected only by a little small piece of land to the rest of Ontario, surrounded by water, cold water in Lake Ontario most years, moderating that area. And the other thing we spoke about yesterday that's not often considered in the whole cool climate discussion, and that is wind. I can tell you my back patio faces west pretty much, and there's a constant breeze. I'm not too far from the lake, but it's always blowing there. So even on the hottest days where in a covered area, temperature might rise above 30, with that constant breeze moving, it strips heat out of the vineyard, it cools the clusters. So you've got a combination of sun and cloud, constant air movement, and overall pretty moderate temperatures. And the net result is a very long growing season. And that was the point I was trying to make yesterday. For me, the sign, maybe the ultimate sign of a cool climate, is how long does it take for your grapes to go from when they flower to when you harvest them at a moderate ripeness level. I'm not talking 15%, alcohol. I'm talking 12 and a half, maximum 13. The longer that period stretches out, the more interesting the wine tends to be. And in this case, Dan tells me it's about 108 to 115 days for that period. That's a long time. That's a really long time. Usually for Chardonnay, it's about 100. So we get a full extra week of flavor development, and we're still rolling in here at 13% alcohol.
Does that not follow in line with these thoughts? Why does Nova Scotia grow grapes that make such great sparkling wine? Same kind of concept. They hang longer. They complete a much longer and slower phenolic journey. You're picking Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and also, you know, L'Acadie and Sauvignon Blanc and other things that go into sparkling wines in Nova Scotia. But especially Chardonnay, elongated well into late October, into early November, before the frosts, lots of flavor development, works out great. The Brix level is quite low. It's perfect for sparkling wine, you know, 16, 17, 18, but it makes for great sparkling wine. And Ontario obviously does that very, very well as well.
Brix, just for the record, is a measure of sugar in the grape juice at harvest. And there are minimum requirements, no maximums, but Ontario wouldn't really need the maximums, not like other parts of the world where you can get into grapes with potential alcohol of 28, 29, 30% alcohol, quite seriously, that they have to actually water back down in order to make a wine with, sorry, not 30% alcohol, 30 Brix, but that's about 18, 19% alcohol. That'd be like fortified wine, which you then water back to 14 and a half, 15, something more reasonable. Not an issue in Ontario. What's your first wine, Miguel?
My first wine, everybody can see, Organized Crime, Limestone Block Chardonnay. So just before I do that, John, for me to really feel i4C, I needed to add to the props. I needed to feel like I'm really part of it. So I'm gonna have to shed some layers here. Is that okay with you? You good with that?
Well, that all depends on how far you're going, my friend.
I won't go that far. So the hat's gonna go, and sunglasses are gonna go, and the scarf's gonna go. Sorry, everyone. Godel does take his scarf off once in a while.
Oh my God, he has a neck. He has a neck. I've never seen it before.
There's the shirt. Okay, that's a really vintage I Live Chardonnay shirt. And we're gonna go straight to brand new swag Chardonnay. Okay.
Oh, come on. Where did you get that? That's great.
I'm not really even sure. Just showed up one day. But Wine Country Ontario, Corkscrew, of course. EQA Wines of Ontario, Spittoon. I'm all set. Okay. So let me cue up a little song for everybody here, if you don't mind, because this song will tell you a little bit about what we're about to taste.
Oh, I know where you're going with this one.
You know where I'm going with that. So if we don't know about the story of organized crime, it actually refers to, the name refers to the heist of an evil pipe organ. Bet you didn't know that, John.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that there were evil pipe organs, but please do explain.
This is true. So there was an argument between factions of peoples way back when, and because one group thought that the other organ was bewitched, was the devil, they stole it and got rid of it. And it was known as organized crime. So
there's the vineyard right there. I just found a photo that I thought I'd throw up.
Right, so founded by Jan Cesarevich, and his daughter now works with his daughter Ania de Deluba. Winemaker is a fantastic winemaker, Greg Yemen. They're on Mountain View Road on the Beansville Bench. You can see it right there, just down from Fielding Estate, and I would say also a stone's throw to Hidden Bench. So halfway basically between the two. And
hang on a sec, if you don't mind. Maybe I'll throw up a map of the Niagara Peninsula just so you can walk us through, because perhaps not everyone knows it like the back of their hands as you do. And I've got this fabulous map here. All right. So there's the Beamsville Bench right there. Yes. So
if you imagine Hidden Bench, Locust Lane, Felsick Vineyard, we're in the sort of nook of the escarpment, which is incredible terroir in this spot. It's an area where the Niagara Escarpment takes a dramatic turn from east-west direction and heads in a north-south direction. So Beamsville is arguably the most distinct bench backed by the escarpment steep cliff faces. And a long time ago, It was a glacial lake known as Lake Iroquois, which is why some people even will refer to it as the Lake Iroquois Bench. And the vineyards sit on this beautiful plain of what was the lake. So as opposed to the 20-mile bench next door, which is a bunch of steps leading up to the escarpment, and then further on down the Short Hills Bench, which is kind of these gently rolling hills below the escarpment, this is an appellation of incredible airflow, frost protection, slopes and elevation that are provided by escarpment topography, which means cooling breezes in summer, warming breezes in winter. So it's a warm spot as things go. And the soils are incredibly heterogeneous: boulders, gravel, sand, silt, clay, shale, limestone. I mean, it's all there. And so this complex mix makes for great water retention, but also great drainage. Two things very important to vines, very important to Chardonnay. So I should let you know that at last year's National Wine Awards of Canada, put on by WineAlign, Organized Crime's Limestone Block Chardonnay was a gold winner, and their Cuvée Christina, named after Jan's wife, was a platinum winner. So that's pretty, those are two fantastic wines. 24 judges decided that was the case. And obviously at their price, $24, $28, they're two of Ontario's incredible gems. Okay.
Wow, terrific.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Just last thing about the wine, John, it's pretty straightforward Burgundian type winemaking. Put to puncheons, nothing new. Set to puncheons, cloudy, turbid, no additions, and then no batonnage, which means for everybody, no stirring of the lees, although it sits on the lees, goes through full malolactic fermentation. And this is that snap, that green apple bite that I'm talking about that I get from bench Chardonnay. There you go.
Well, I have to say that every year for the National Wine Awards, when we get together to taste wines from across Canada, last year we tasted, what, 1,800, almost 2,000 wines from Nova Scotia all the way to BC. Actually, no, we tasted some stuff from Newfoundland as well, some fruit wines. But every year, when it comes to Chardonnay flights, there is a flutter of excitement in the judging room. And in fact, a little competition between the different panels, because everyone wants the Chardonnay flights. It is one of the joys to judge. There are some other categories that are a little bit tougher, that we're a little less excited to taste, but when it comes to Canadian wines, Chardonnay is, for me, and I'm going to go right out here publicly and say it, is Canada's best single white grape variety, from sparkling through to these fantastic table wines that we see throughout. And the style range, the versatility, the possibilities with Chardonnay are really quite extraordinary, much more versatile than, say, Cabernet Sauvignon or Pinot Noir or Sauvignon Blanc. Those are grapes that perform well, yes, but in certain pockets, whereas Chardonnay can be grown anywhere from the coolest sites to the warmest sites and give something different but compelling. And maybe a minute on just general topography of Niagara. You mentioned already the escarpment here that runs there. That's the main significant topographic feature. It's not a chain of mountains, but you get up a few hundred meters above the lake. And as most winemakers will tell you, as many have told me in the last couple of days, don't forget to mention that elevation, even though we're dealing with 50, 100, 150 meters difference between certain sites, is significant. The grapevine is an amazingly sensitive little instrument, and minor variations in temperature, half a degree, 3/4 of a degree, makes all the difference in the world. So in Niagara, if you remember, elevation and distance from the lake, you've got a good part of the story already figured out. That area that you're talking about here in Beamsville, well, this is where the distance between the escarpment and the shores of Lake Ontario is narrowest. You're going to show us a wine in a moment there from Winona, which is about 2 kilometers. Well, the escarpment is only 2 kilometers from the lake. Mm-hmm. Right, we'll get to Elia's vineyard in a second. But I want to show you another wine from Beamsville. Since we're in Beamsville, I've got the Malivoire.
Just before you show that wine, can I ask you one question?
Yes.
So I think we probably agree that our Ontario's most important red grapes, Cabernet Franc, Gamay. I think we probably, Pinot Noir, we'll go from there. I also think we agree that Chardonnay and Riesling are our two most important white grapes. You'd agree? would you say?
100% Chardonnay and Riesling,
So do you know
Cabernet
what,
Franc, Gamay, and
what
Pinot Noir.
falls in between Chardonnay and Riesling?
Tell me.
Godel.
Really? I
Really?
haven't tasted much Godel from Ontario, but perhaps one day.
Maybe we should plant some. Yeah.
Inspired idea.
Okay. Tell me about Malivoire, John.
I'll tell you about Malivoire. Malivoire, my history with Malivoire actually goes back to about the beginning of my career in wine. I bet you didn't even know this, but I did a harvest with Anne Sperling back when she was winemaker at Malivoire in 1999. We were in the Moira vineyard there harvesting Gewürztraminer. Well, when I say working the harvest, that means I showed up for a morning, picked grapes for 3 hours and said, bloody hell, this is a lot of work. And then we went and tasted some wines. But it was my first experience picking grapes, and the Moira vineyard is a terrific site right in that little sweet spot of Beamsville. But what I poured for myself today, and hopefully other folks get a chance to taste this wine because I think it's absolutely terrific, is the Matiare vineyard Chardonnay. All right, so the winemaker of Malivoire these days is a gentleman by the name of Shiraz Matiare, the ill-fatedly named Shiraz because he makes terrific Chardonnay, not so much Shiraz or Syrah. But this is his home vineyard. So imagine the Malivoire vineyard just on that first rise. You could think of different steps along the bench up to the top of the escarpment. Malivoire, the Moira, a little bit lower down, but Matiare is just underneath the escarpment. And Shiraz will tell you about the trials and tribulations of just trying to even plant up there because you're almost straight onto the limestone bedrock. There's not a whole lot of topsoil, so it's a skinny, bony site. And the wines, both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir growing up there, for me, have this leanness, this svelteness, this piquantness, as you say, this snap, this tension, this energy. And he's been perfecting the approach with this site as he gets to know it a little bit better and better. So, really not much to say here on the winemaking side. I don't fuss too much about those details. It's what's inside the glass that matters. But this wine, no new wood influence at all. Doesn't taste woody at all. It's all about the green apple snap. And talking about my definition of cool climate style wine and cool climate style Chardonnay in particular, it's all about the fruit character that I was talking about yesterday. You can take the same piece of fruit and have it at different degrees of ripeness from, say, a peach, which is green and underripe and hard. Then it's perfectly ripe. Then it's a little bit overripe. And then it gets a little bit mushy or it's baked into a pie. Still a peach, but different character along the way. And for me, cool climate is always on that green, sharp, tart, higher acid side, never into the jammy spectrum. And this hits all of those notes. It's all pear, it's all green peach, it's all citrus, it's all, it gives you desire for additional sips. And I'll throw one last thing in there because I guess we have to mention it at some point, but minerality is another word that crops up time and time again. I have my own very personal definition of it that I'm trying to foist on others. So far, my campaign is meeting with moderate success, but for me, it's a taste. It's a salinity, and I find in really well-made Chardonnay from the Niagara bench in particular, has a lot of this. It's not salty, but it has this little twang, this little saline twang that just keeps you coming back. It's that umami that you crave in your mouth.
I agree. It's not a metaphor, that's for sure. I think people like Alex Maltman would tell us that it's a great marketing thing, but doesn't have any real presence in reality. But I think I'm on the same page with you that it is a taste factor. It's also a conceptual factor for me, kind of like the intro to Breaking Bad, where everybody's name has two periodic table letters bolded in green letters. And to me, minerality are these things, the elements in the soil, the salt in the soil, whether it's sodium, whether it's magnesium, whatever element is creating that saltiness that imparts to the vines and then to the wine.
But it is a thing. It's not just imagination. There are elements that create a salty sensation that are measurable and found in wine.
Yes, and more so to me, soil related than air. Like, you talk about wines that are made in maritime climates. And a lot of writers will try to say, oh, it's the marine influence. It's the salt coming off the sea that makes these wines salty. I'd like to think that soils have a lot more to do with the taste of mineral in wine than the air does, I would think.
Well, They do, almost certainly, although I will say that seaside vineyards do. I mean, that salt spray that comes off the ocean, the breeze that carries, you can smell, you can taste it when you're walking by the ocean side. That does deposit on grapes and has been shown to find its way. But that's not, well, I guess it's part of terroir if you believe that. Ambient air, wind patterns, and proximity to oceans are all part of terroir, which they are.
Or if you believe Cameron Diaz, it says you must rinse the grapes before you make them into wine, because you never know what's on the grapes.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite i4C School of Cool moments was when we had Alex Maltman, who's a professor emeritus of geology in Wales. We had him come over to give us a lesson on a session on minerality, and the keynote speaker that year was Matt Kramer, and he was sitting on this panel that I was moderating. And so Alex gives his very scholarly and airtight explanation of how impossible it is for vines to actually absorb geological minerals and then for us to be able to taste them, because minerals don't have taste and they don't translocate through the root system and they get lost in the winemaking process. Anyhow, he went on for a good 20 minutes about the impossibility of minerality, and then a number of winemakers each gave their view on the matter. And at the end of the table, the last one to speak was Matt Kramer, and he starts off his presentation by holding up a red piece of cardboard. Doesn't say a word, 30 seconds holding up to everyone's like, what is he getting at? He said, okay, what do you see? And the audience said, well, I see a red piece of paper. What's your point? He says, you see a red piece of paper. But Mr. Maltman, he sees wavelength 472, which is the chemical, the wavelength of red light waves. The scientists just haven't been able to figure out what minerality is, but we can all taste it. We all understand what it is. We know it's in the glass. It's empirical. We've tasted 1,000 times. They're looking for the wavelength. We're seeing red, all right? We're tasting minerality. Let the scientists look for the wavelength that creates that mineral sensation. Anyhow, that was fun. One of the more controversial sessions.
Yeah, I think it was Matt Kramer who said scientists don't know shit about wine. Isn't that what he said? No, I'm paraphrasing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but pretty accurate, very close. Paraphrase quote.
Shall we tell you what's in my second glass? I'm going to show everybody the bottle right here. Oh, let me do it right there. Cellars, Chardonnay, Isle Vineyard. Very interesting story. And just before I get into it, just to finish off what we were just talking about, Chardonnay has to taste of a sense of place. It's got to taste like it comes from somewhere specific. And you and I were in Bourgogne in November. We spent 6 days traveling through all of the fringe locations of the territory. And I think that we're at the point to talk about Niagara in such a fashion. So we talked about Beamsville Bench already. We've mentioned Winona. We've mentioned Short Hills Bench, 20 Mile Bench, but now we're moving on to Niagara on the Lake. So the Isle family, Adnan Isle, founded this winery in 2010. Adnan is a mechanical engineer with an MBA degree who immigrated from Turkey in 2006. So here we're bringing a little international component to the deal. No Hungarian Chardonnay, no Austrian Chardonnay, no Armenian Chardonnay here, but we have a Turkish influence somehow, and especially in the design of the label, which is a stag, which represents the wine drinking vessels used by the Hittites of Anatolia.
Can you show us that label so we can have a look?
Show you one more time. See the stag on the label.
And by the way, we've got, can you see the Isle Vineyards now up on your screen? Is everyone seeing that?
Beautiful spot. Looks like.
So it's not a play on modern, iPhone, iPad, iCellar. This is Isle. Cellars. Okay.
It's like early October or mid-October in Iceland. Early October, I'd say. So Niagara on the Lake, completely different growing area, obviously, makes a very different style of Chardonnay. And that's what I'm trying to say here is that when you buy and you taste Chardonnay from different areas of the Niagara Peninsula and from the benchlands, you're going to get a different expression every time. So what does that mean for Niagara? I'm going to ask you first, John, if you don't mind. What do you think of when you think about Niagara on the Lake Chardonnay?
Very simply, for me, a little richer, rounder, broader shouldered, slightly riper, fruit profile. So you shift out of that citrus and green fruit, green pear, green peach, into much riper. We're certainly not into tropical, but if you look at the topography, can you see that map there now? So here's the Niagara-on-the-Lake area, generally speaking. So you're 10 kilometers from the lake shore here up to the escarpment in St. David's. So this is a fairly flat area, exposure to the sun throughout the growing season. So no hills, no aspects where you're shaded. These are all north-facing slopes. So you get less sunlight here. Here you get more sunlight, so generally warmer, and therefore slightly broader style of wines, generally speaking.
Yeah, and I generally find them the same. I agree with you in sort of flowery terms. I find them, first of all, to look at much more yellow hued. From a sort of like a golden yellow color. It looks like a glass of sunshine often. And in terms of flavor and texture, you get this kind of gelid lemon curd. Sometimes you get that summer corn kind of taste to it, and often almost a custard character. They definitely have a richer profile. And this is a prime example. Barrel fermented in 500-liter French oak puncheons, inoculated, highly encouraged to go through malolactic fermentation, lees stirred, lots of batonnage for 6 months. That's going to add to that texture and that creamy texture that we talk about. And then you are almost likely for sure going to end up with a rich, opulent, creamy, and highly flavored Chardonnay.
Sorry, I'm just getting some notes here that the map is not showing for technical reasons that I cannot. So what do we say, folks? Can we see the map now? Do you see Niagara there? If you can, give me a shout out on the chat function.
Yes, we can see the map.
Oh, thank goodness.
There it
I didn't
is.
expect it to go perfectly smoothly. This is a Zoom session after all. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Michael. Carry on.
No worries. And I think that in cases like this for my cellars, I think people need to have a little bit of patience with a wine like this. I think there's a little bit of that, and I think you could probably talk about it, and in fact, your review talked about it in more technical terms of this wine, that this kind of corn character and this creamy character will change, will dissipate, will morph. And if you wait a year and a half, 2 years, you're more likely to get a fuller and broader expression rather than things standing out. Would you agree that time will be worth waiting on a wine like this? I'm not talking 10 years, but a year or two.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this point I found, or when I tasted it before, I found that it a little disassociated, which is to say you have the barrel components from the cream corn on one side and the fruit is on the other. At some point, those move together, and in this case, I don't think it will take all that long, maybe another year or two, but you get a much more harmonious, overall pleasing and enduringly beautiful type of wine style with a little bit of age. If you notice, you're tasting a young Chardonnay and things seem to be on different sides. You get wood flavor up front and then fruit on the back, or vice versa. Just stick it in the cellar for another 6 months or a year. What have you got to lose after all, right? It's going to probably get more harmonious.
Yep. There you go. Okay, what's next for you?
What's next for me? I'm going to leave the map up there since we couldn't show it either before. So we were in Beamsville with the organized crime and with the Matiare. And then we were just, actually, is that 4 Mile Creek, that Nice Cellars? Or is it St. David's? I know it's right on the border of those two appellations, yes?
Well, the label says Niagara on the Lake. So
maybe on both sides then of the border. So Niagara on the Lake is the collective that could be these 4 sub-appellations together, just like Niagara's escarpment could come from any one of these 3 bench appellations. If it says one of the specific ones, then it has to be 100% from that bench. Like my next wine, which actually doesn't say the specific sub-appellation, but it is all from one particular sub-appellation, and this is the 20 Mile Bench. All right, sorry, it got a little torn as I moved it out of my wine fridge.
Yeah, mine's in pretty good shape.
Oh, okay, so there you go. So this is a label that holds a lot of memories for the wine trade in Ontario and around the world, because this was one of the first joint ventures between a Burgundian house, Boisset in this case, and a local company, well, not so local, Constellation. They were a pretty large international company back then. But this goes back even further, back to the 90s, the first joint venture. I think it was Jafflin, another Burgundy négociant that had joined together with an Ontario producer to make Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Even back then, even 25 years ago, it was already looking pretty clear that Niagara would be a sharp place to grow Burgundian style, cool climate style Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So this is the continuation of that project. If you get a chance to meet Thomas Batchelder, who was the original winemaker for the Clos Jourdain and the current winemaker for the Clos Jourdain, he'll give you the entire backstory, and it is quite fascinating. The project was shelved in 2011 when Constellation was sold off, moved out of the wine business in Canada, and it was picked up by Arterra, now the company that owns the Clos Jourdain, and dusted off and brought back. This is the first vintage, I think, since 2011. This is 2017. So what can I say about this project? Other than that, it was designed to be the premium of the premium from the beginning. And the vineyards, which were originally planted in the 20 Mile Bench here in 1999, were done with all of the right background research details, high density plantings, canopy management, trellising, all of the things that make for great wine starting in the vineyard were in place here. And it's actually kind of fortunate and unfortunate, right in the middle of the Grand Clos, where this vineyard, where this wine comes from, right in the middle of that vineyard was supposed to be this fantastic winery building designed by Frank Gehry, and that was shelved and everything didn't work out in the end. But you know, on the one hand, it would have been brilliant to have a Frank Gehry building in Niagara. On the other hand, it would have been sitting on some of the most prime vineyard land in all of Niagara and all of Ontario and all of Canada. It's like, imagine building a hotel in the middle of Le Morachet, you know, 100 years ago. Wow, what a mistake that would have been for wine lovers in any case. So this is the revival of this really exciting project, and Thomas, who's had experience making wine not only in Niagara, but also in Oregon and in Burgundy, in fact, refers to this vineyard, the Grand Clos, but also some of the other projects that he's working on under his own label, Batchelder Wines. He's got a really choice parcel in the Wismer Wingfield. If you guys can remember something from this little cocktail hour, remember Wismer as one of the great farming families of Niagara, but in particular this Wingfield little sub-parcel, and he's done like a Burgundian monk sort of thing, dividing it into ever smaller little parcels. So now there's not just Wismer Wingfield, there's Wismer Wingfield East and Wismer Wingfield West, and on it goes, stuff that you and I get very excited about. Probably everyone else has gone on to sipping more wine, as I hope they are, and they should. But the point being that even within one single vineyard, there are differences from east to west. And you go, as I mentioned before, 50 meters up, 50 meters down, depth of soil changes, distance from the lake changes, wine style changes. This Grand Clos will perhaps one day in 30, 40, 50 years be considered premier or Grand Cru level when we get to that point where we start to divide out these vineyards into their quality potential. And what can I say? I was a big fan of the wines originally, and I'm so glad to see this project revived because it's an important one for the Ontario industry in general, not just for Ontario, not just for Thomas.
I can see that our good friend and colleague at WineAlign, David Lorison, just in the Zoom webinar chat just said it's a benchmark for Ontario Chardonnay. If you have not tried it, it's available in vintages. You should go out and grab a bottle and try it. It certainly is. There's no discussion about Ontario Chardonnay without this being in the mix. That's for sure.
And I'll say one little other thing on the slide here. Back in the day, Le Grand Cru, that was their top bottling, and it sold for, do you remember, $75 a bottle? Mm-hmm. Yet with this recent revival, I think this sells for $44.95. So they've actually dropped the price. How unheard of is that? I hope nobody from Arterra is listening.
Yes. Same vineyard, same prospects, same probability, same monkified plot, right? So it's a bit of a coup to have it back and to have it at a better price for sure. Okay.
Just check if I had a photo of the vineyard. If I find it, I'll flash it up. But why don't you introduce your
wine? What's in my glass now? So here we go. This is Trail Estate, Chardonnay, Unfiltered. This is the third. So what that tells us is that Trail Estate and their winemaker, Mackenzie Brisbois, have now made 3 of these particular Chardonnays, unfined, unfiltered, sort of out there a little bit, and unlike any other Chardonnay you're likely to have tasted or will taste for quite some time in Ontario, but a very special wine in its own right. So I'll give you a little background. Trail is at the upper portion of Prince Edward County's southwest corner. John, you know this well. It's now your neck of the woods on the Benway Road just below Hinterland. And I would say the Grange of Prince Edward and Clawson Chase, they're 2 nearest neighbors, I would guess.
Hinterland's almost across the street.
Yeah, Hinterland
a little bit down.
Yes. So when I think about Mackenzie Brisbois' wines, I would say that it doesn't get more investigative, experimental, and inquisitive than what she's doing. And not just this Chardonnay, but when you think about skin fermented Riesling and Gewurz, barrel fermented and barrel aged Rieslings, 2 pet nats, a white and a red, she's doing it all. And this third leg of this Chardonnay trilogy now that she's made, the unfined and the unfiltered, is the caution to the wind, hues from grapes and how they react in every shade under the rainbow. It's a puzzle of dizzying proportion. And I'm not sure any other winemaker in Ontario could handle this interconnection and unrelated pieces as well as she does. It's really quite something what she's gone out to try to effect at Trail Estate, and getting more and more brave, more confident every year, pushing the boundaries, and it kind of makes some of us feel like we're always a step or 2 behind. So, you know, hats off to, well, my hat's already off, but hats off to Mac for all that work. So back for a minute, Prince Edward County, most enigmatic wine region in the world, would you say? Up there?
Enigmatic?
Yes.
I would say one of the most challenging wine regions in the world, particularly if you're in it for the money. You don't go to Prince Edward County. It's challenging, it's cold, yields are notoriously low. I mentioned already, you've got to bury the vines or cover them with netting, I guess in this case. I'm not sure what Mackenzie was doing out in this particular shot, but you can just see that the vines are extremely low to the ground, which is necessary because you have to bury them in the wintertime. The canes can't be too far from the dirt because, well, there isn't that much dirt. You have to hill it up. So they're literally about a foot off the ground, which means, imagine that you're out there harvesting. It's backbreaking work. You can't do this with a tractor. You're out there by hand picking every single bunch, and you're bending over to do so.
But then Trail Estate and Hinterland, as we talked about, very much a part of the Geo Textile movement to protect vines in the winter. Can you talk about a little bit about that?
So Geo Textiles are essentially blankets for vines, and that's what they are. Once you've laid down your vines, you can cover them with, it is literally a fabric-like blanket, and you roll it out. You can do it mechanically or you do it by hand. You clip it along the top, and that little tent that you create over the vines captures the residual heat of the earth and keeps that interior zone where the vines are just that little bit higher than the ambient exterior temperature in order to keep them alive. So you save on the burying. Actually, it's not the burying in the fall that's the problem. It's the unburying in the springtime that's the real problem, because your timing has to be perfect. If you wait too long, the vines have already started to grow, but under the dirt, and when you move away the dirt, you knock off the buds, and well, your crop is severely reduced. And if you do it too early, well, then there was no point in burying them in the first place because you might be hit by that late spring frost. So it's just, I mean, it's a region fraught with important and difficult decisions. But the blankets kind of alleviate that, because I know some winemakers who will cover up bury their vines, not bury, but use the Geo Textiles. And then in the spring, when it looks like things are warming up, they'll remove them, but just still leave them in the vineyards. So in the case of a frost call, you get the warning, right? You can rush back out, cover them, but throw the blankets back on top, and therefore protect your crop for the year. Anyhow, to say it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And I say enigmatic because that's part of it, but also because Prince Edward County is constantly, and has been for years, compared to Burgundy. And we all know that it's not, even though there are some parallels in terms of latitude and limestone. It's the parallels kind of end there, really. And obviously Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are the top two cultivars, but maybe we shouldn't be talking about Burgundy. We should just be talking about Prince Edward County because it does its own thing. With respect to, yeah, go ahead.
Do me a favor and just tell me the alcohol level on that wine, if you would.
I will tell you. It is 12.7.
So that's kind of already at the upper limit. I know that she doesn't chaptalize, that's 12.7 natural, and that's amazing. I've had Chardonnays that are 12 and under 12, but you know what? They're not unripe. Most parts of the world, if you're harvesting at 11.5% potential alcohol, you're harvesting green, mean, lean, caustic, unfriendly grapes, and therefore making wine of the same style. Whereas the length of the growing season, as I mentioned, in Prince Edward County, is such that even at 12% alcohol potential, you've got fully ripe flavors. And that for me is magic. There are so few places on the planet that can do that.
And yet, John, interestingly enough, 2017 of this wine was harvested on October 8th. The 2018 was harvested over a 5-day period from the 19th to the 24th of September. That's 3 to 4 weeks ahead of 2017. So even with this long growing season, there are years when things happen very early. And I can only imagine what this year will be like. Probably will end up being similar to last year in terms of harvest time, I would think. Maybe it'll be a few days earlier. But you know, when we talk about this elongated growing season, we're not talking about picking in November. And then we're not talking about picking Cabernet Sauvignon in Niagara River. We're talking about picking Chardonnay in Prince Edward County here. So,
well, heaven forbid that it reached 13.1 potential alcohol. There'll be parties in the streets of Picton and Wellington and Bloomfield. By the way, I see a few people raising their hands. If you have any questions, maybe the easiest way to handle it is to just throw your question up in the Q&A box. There are quite a few comments coming through. Tough to follow all of those. But yeah, let's do that. And we'll save some time for questions right at the end.
We'll try to get to these last two wines, and then we'll get to some questions. So just last thing I'll say about Mackenzie's Chardonnay. I thought last year, the 2017, was the first true leg of this concept of this unfined and unfiltered Chardonnay she's making. And this, in 18, this has more flesh, a little bit of caramel, even more caramel if the last one had a little bit, and more body. So it's quite it still has that snap and that bite back, but it's quite remarkable that in Prince Edward County at 12.7% to have this kind of level of flesh and body in Chardonnay and structure too. So what I remember the last time I met and tasted with Mackenzie, she said to me, hopefully my lack of filtration helps you to hear the music in my wine. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put up a tune this time, but I'm definitely hearing the music in her wine.
Well said, well said. An interesting question here that pops up all the time in the world of wine, and nobody has the answer, but let's maybe try and give what we think on the matter from Nancy Graham here. How do vintners know when to harvest? You want to take a stab at that one?
I think the answer is very simple. I think a really good winemaker walks the vineyard every single day during the harvest, starts before they know the grapes are getting close, and they start walking through all of their vines and they start tasting their grapes. Sure, they walk around and they test the Brix levels, the sugar levels, but they walk around and they taste them. And when they take a bite into a grape and the seeds inside and also the stem that's attached to it crunch, when they're brown and they crunch, you know the grape has traveled its phenolic all the way through its phenolic journey. To me, that's the simple answer.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think you're a little bit poetic. I mean, that's in the ideal world. For me, the harvest decision for a winemaker, as it has been related to me on so many occasions, is just the worst day of the year, because that's the mulligan you cannot take back. Once you've picked the grapes, you're stuck. Whatever that's your decision. Everything before you can manipulate, everything after you can manipulate, but you can never change the moment that you harvest. So I think winemakers just sit there and sweat it out and hope that they've gotten it right. Sometimes they miss it by a couple of days. Sometimes maybe they anticipate it by a couple of days too early. You never know what the weather is going to be. You can study the radar and get a sense, but there's always something freaky that happens. This is nature, right? So, you know, it's a really difficult decision, and even the most experienced winemakers don't always get it right. But it takes courage. And it reminds me of a quote of one of my favorite Chablis producers, Bernard Ravenel, who told me, I mean, changing climate, it's a cool climate in Chablis, always has been, always will be. But 20, 30 years ago, the winemakers who had the courage to wait were always the last ones harvesting. Today, the winemakers with the greatest courage are the ones that are out there earlier harvesting to still retain that crunchy, that freshness. So it also depends on what you want to make, right? And every winemaker has a different view on what ripeness is outside of acid and sugar stuff you can measure. There's flavor, as you're talking about. And yes, most great winemakers taste the grapes and base their decision on what they're tasting, on the flavor, on the seeds. Are they brown? Is the wood lignified on the stems? Anyhow, great question. Not a simple answer, as you can tell.
And, you know, to wax a little poetic again, it's like Eminem. It's lose yourself, right? You better lose yourself in the vineyard, in the grapes. You only get one shot. Don't blow it.
And then you hope everyone shows up to the party. Someone just made a great comment. Yeah, you got to have all the pickers there. You know, hope that they weren't out partying all night and you can't get them up in the morning, or they were stuck on the other side of the border because a pandemic hit the world and you can't get enough workers in. You know, 1,001 things can go wrong. As I say, if you got a lot of money and you need some tax write-offs, I can help you out. I will find you a vineyard. I will get you started, and you will never have any tax problems again. There you are.
Okay.
All right. What's your last wine?
The last wine right here.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Leading Post Chardonnay 2018 Senchuk Vineyard, Lincoln Lakeshore, VQA. Okay, where do we begin? Where do we begin with this?
Do you want a map? Do you want a picture? What do you want? You
yeah.
just want to talk?
What you got? What, you got a picture of Winona?
Let me see what I can pull out of the archives here.
So while you're looking for it, really in a way set apart from the bench wineries, but still beneath that shadow of the Niagara Escarpment. This is where the land is more of a plain that gently slides down through the Lincoln Lakeshore and into Lake Ontario. Nadia and Ilya Senchuk, they started as a virtual winery. Then they found this property on Highway 8 in Winona, very close to Stony Creek. Set up shop 2013, 2014. It's sandy soil, largest stones that they find 3 to 4 feet down. They were constantly digging them up when they're creating and digging out their vineyards, and atop a bed of gray clay. So very low vigor from the sandy soil, and it's really a flip side, kind of an opposite type of soil structure to what you find in the upper benches. Ilya's wines for me reside in this very complex realm. He's somewhere between fracas and order. They're not always comfortable. They don't follow an obvious pattern, and I don't at first didn't think so, but I can safely say there is a Senchuk style, that his wines don't taste like anybody else's. And that's partly him, obviously, the winemaker, and it's partly the place where he's making them, especially now that the vineyards that he planted, especially the Chardonnay vineyard, is now about 7 years old, I think about that. And it's coming into its own. This fruit is starting to produce real fantastic wine. So last year, 2017's version was a platinum winner at the National Wine Awards of Canada. And it's only getting better. So one thing we need to know about Ilya Senchuk is he loves his clones. And he'll talk about clones more than most winemakers in Niagara. In this particular wine, 64% clone 548 Chardonnay and 36% clone 96.
Can you just back up and give us a little briefing on clones for those who don't watch Star Wars?
Sure. So, I mean, every grape variety is not created equal. We need to know that. You know, the prototype, the biotype prototype for Chardonnay clones obviously comes from Bourgogne. Most Chardonnay clones that have been planted in Ontario have originally come from Burgundy, but not all, obviously. Clone 96 is a classic, obviously. 96 is, help me out, Pomard clone.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So it's very important not just to match grape to soil, to site and soil, but it's also important to match clone. Some clones will have more vigor than others. Some clones will produce more opulent fruit than others. Some clones will will ripen faster than others. Some will elongate longer into the season. So it's important to match the clone to the site based on what that site is able to produce on average in a given year. So taking it further, these grapes are whole cluster pressed, separated by clone. They're allowed to settle in chilled tanks overnight, and then the juice is racked into barrels, clone 548 into one set, and clone 96 into another. It's all about keeping the clones separate until it's time for them to come together near being, in the near finished wine moment, and that's when a little bit of this clone and a little bit of that come together, and Ilya is allowed to make what he feels.
You're painting a picture of Ilya like some sort of mad scientist in his laboratory, of tweaking here, tweaking there, adding. Is there an artistic side to his winemaking, do you think? Or is it all just hardcore analytical?
The artistic side is the feel side, right? So, he's got some wine sitting in some barrels and some wine sitting in other barrels. And then when it gets all along the way, he's tasting. He's walking through, he's tasting from the barrels. He's getting a sense of where these barrels are going. And he's building this puzzle in his head. If I use a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it's more than science. It's intuition and it's feeling at that point as well, obviously. But in the end, power, body, tons of fruit, definite barrel influence. I mean, it's a Burgundian way of doing things, obviously. And I like to think of it as kind of, especially in this 18 vintage, this opulence feels Puy-Frisé. It feels Southern Burgundy to me. Again, I can't believe we're saying that about Ontario Chardonnay, but in this particular instance, I'm getting that, but with an additional geographic designation, which is the climat, let's say, if you like, or the summerness of the Senchuk vineyard. And
I have to say, why I'm excited about this particular little patch of vineyard. Senchuk is the only one there, right? This is the first vineyard that you would hit if you're driving out of Toronto heading down to Niagara. So it's a great place to stop in if you don't want to go too far. But really not so much certainly not estate wines, single vineyard wines being produced in this area. And you're really close. This photograph unfortunately doesn't show it, but you're literally 800 meters from the lake. So you want to talk about lake effect and the extra hang time that you get at the end of the season because you're next to the warm waters of Lake Ontario, and also the delay in growth of the vine in the springtime because you're next to the cold waters of Lake Ontario at that point. It's really a very particular climate zone. The soil is a little bit different, all of these alluvial soils. And now with 7-8 years of existence of these vines, it's starting to show its own personality. But as you said, big difference between the 17, which I would have been much further north in Bourgogne, if you want to take that analogy, versus the 18, which was harvested 10 days earlier, as I understand it, and much more opulent, riper style.
Yeah, very much. And when we're also talking about that importance of how much you deal with your solids when you're making Chardonnay. Really, really good winemakers have figured out how to work with solids and push things to the limit where you're adding incredible complexity and texture to your wine without heading into this crazy reductiveness that can really distract for a long time after it's bottled. And I think, Ilya Senchuk is one of those winemakers who's found the sweet spot, the solids sweet spot, if you will, where you're not stirring them and you're not giving them too much agitation when they're in their barrels, but you're leaving them in there, leave that gross lees in there so that you're creating this magic umami in Chardonnay, especially Ontario Chardonnay.
Certainly a vineyard to watch, and I can't wait to see the development and hopefully some other vineyards planted nearby or the grapes grown nearby turned into single vineyard wines, because it could one day be its own sub-appellation. Right now it's Lincoln Lakeshore, part of that greater area, but not all parts of Lincoln Lakeshore are made equally. All right, I'm going to throw out my last wine here, and sorry folks, I know that some of you got the list of wines that we'd be tasting, and Flat Rock, the Rusty Shed Chardonnay was on that, but not this particular vintage. I decided to keep the younger one for another time and dug deep into my cellar and came up with this 2007, just to breach the discussion a little bit of the ageability. There's one. Maybe you can describe for us, Michael, the current vintage, but I wanted to reach back into the time vault here and see what happens to Ontario Chardonnay at a very high quality after 13 years. Yeah, is that what we're at here? Coming up 13 years. Well, I mean, you can see typically the color moves on, right? It goes from very pale to a much more deep golden yellow color. That's just oxidation at work there, oxidizing, just like an apple will turn brown on your counter once you've cut it. Same thing with wine. And then for me, it's mostly about the evolution of the flavor profile, but also the texture too. That's really, I think, what makes sticking a wine in your cellar for 10 or 15 or 20 years worth doing, because those are the things that really change. Who cares about the color? Quite frankly, what I want to see is, has this wine survived? And by survived, I mean, is there still some fruit left? Some people like to drink really old cold tea that has zero fruit flavor left. I like to catch my wines just when they've moved into that period of development, but still hold a little bit of fruit. And I think this was the right call, pulling this wine out now. Still some fruit there, but it's shifted into that autumnal phase. You know, I just imagine walking through an apple orchard in October, November, when a few have fallen down, and you get that smell of evolving apples. They're not baked, they're not into apple pie, but they've got that wonderful, you know, earthy, wet grass sort of smell. This, when I first opened it, before we jumped on this call, reminded me of hot buttered honeyed toast, which is a reference for me of wines like, to pull out an obscure analogy, Hunter Valley Semillon, you know, old Hunter Valley Semillon, just takes in this direction, not because there's any wood. Most of those wines have no barrel influence. This one did have some barrel influence, but it's very reminiscent of that, this warm, buttered wheat toast, honeyed character with a little bit of that ripe peach and slightly desiccated apples. Anyhow, this is Flat Rock. We're back on the 20-mile bench, so we're in that sweet spot along the bench. And in fact, Flat Rock has a parcel that's just right on almost on the top of the escarpment, very near the Vine Mount Ridge sub-appellation, which is one of the coolest because you're further from the lake, you're at higher elevation. We're just beneath that. And yes, indeed, if you drive by the vineyard, there is an old rusty shed in the middle of it. So the wine comes by its name quite honestly. And what I appreciate about Flat Rock, and Ed Madronich, who started this about 20 years ago, is that he wanted to focus on strengths of this part of Niagara, which was Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Riesling. So they'll make terrific wines in those three varieties. A couple of other little things crept into the portfolio, but it's always been and will always be, I think, these three varieties that are the flagships and should be the flag bearers of this little section of the escarpment. So terrific to see how this is aged. How's the young version?
I love that you pulled that one out. In fact, I think Ed would love that too. I was on my way to Cuvée in the last week of February, early March in 2015, I think it was. And I was driving down with Eric Velland, who you know, editor of Food and Drink magazine, and decided to stop in at Flat Rock just to do an impromptu quick tasting. Called Jay, Jay was there at the time, called Jay and Ed and said, do you mind if we stop in? Sure, come. And Ed went ahead and poured a vertical of 9 vintages of the Rusty Shed for us, going back to 2001.
How lovely is that?
The impromptu tasting. And he just said, oh, it's time. We need to do one of these anyway, so let's just do this. And I remember tasting that 2007, and that was 5 years ago that this happened. I think I would have told you then that it would have been drinking quite beautifully now still. It's an incredibly inexpensive wine that has this ability to age 10, 12 years, even more, 15 years, right? So good
Absolutely.
on you. Good on you, mates.
Well, yeah, we're kind of reaching, we've already reached the end of our hour. Lots of people are still sticking with us. Please do. I thought we might get a couple of voices in here. Do you think we should allow Thomas in? Thomas Batchelder? He's raised his hand. I think maybe he's got something to say. He's always got something amazing to say. Thomas, are you there? Are you willing to join us for a quick little conversation? Ouais, salut Thomas.
Hey, what a fluke, man. This is a wonderful fluke. I've been listening to you guys from my cellar, and your request came as I just was about to go up the escarpment behind the bat cave where all sound is cut off. So I am now sitting here in the vineyard.
Oh, perfect.
You guys have done an amazing job, man. What a fun thing. I know you could do it just as well with Chianti, but let's talk about this. What's the question?
What's the question? What's the answer?
Yeah, I know. That's the answer. What is the answer?
Well, we've already spoken a little bit about Le Clos and the history of that project, and also some of your wines particularly from the Wismar Wingfield Vineyard, as you kindly left me that voicemail. But maybe you could just give us your view, not as Thomas Batchelder wines or Clos Jourdain winemaker, but as a wine lover, because you used to be a wine journalist, just like us back in the day. You're an outsider, you're tasting these wines. Where do you put them in a world context, and how do you think the quality kind of measures up, and where will it go in the future?
Well, I actually, because I was cleaning out my cellar, I didn't actually hear the bit about the Clos Jourdain. Thanks for including that, but I did hear the whole thing about Flat Rock, which was, and your little segue there and during Cuvée and stuff, totally inspiring. And of course, I love how, I like to be inclusive, but if we're talking about the Vineland bench, the Jordan bench, and the way those things work together, it's partly the distance from the lake. And I think Ed knew that when he bought his property from the Staff family back in, am I in here? Are you guys hearing me?
Oh yeah, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, that whole section, right? It's like that whole section of we could talk about any part of Niagara or any part of the world, but that whole section to me, I'm not from here, right? So I'm trying to learn the lessons from the vignerons who've been here forever, but also from the people who've grown row crops and why they didn't grow grapes. And the whole swath that starts with, let's say, Kelly Mason's vineyard and Maury's, vineyard down in Vineland, and goes up through Featherstone and Craig Wismar's bunch of vineyards there. And if you go around Balls Falls and come down through Westcott and the Clos Talon Ridge, and of course Ed's great Flat Rock property coming down to the Clos and the Grand Clos, that whole section was considered too far from the lake to grow good grapes. So it was in either Labrusca or soya or corn. I'm like, what? Am I supposed to believe this when I came here in 2003? But I've come to believe it. And, this is beyond the scope of a couple of minutes, but I would say that if you're trying to grow something that ripens quickly, like Chardonnay or Pinot, par exemple, and you can lengthen out that season and slow down the sugar development and increase the minerality. Oh, I'm not allowed to say that. The minerality and flavor.
We've already brought in the M word here, so don't worry about that.
So I'll just go with the flavor development, right? I love to think of, the French are so good and they're so bad. The French are good at doing the la and le particles, and they definitely call it la vigne. I think that's appropriate. She has a bunch of babies. She has to ripen every year. We constrain her. We don't give her a lot of babies, right? Because we green harvest, or we plant her in a row where she could take over the whole friggin' hectare if she decided to. But I think, what happens is when you hold the vine back, those grapes are developed and they're given lots of sugar and lots of flavor for the birds, not for us, not for Romani Conti, but for the birds, so those seeds can go elsewhere by other means and reproduce the vines. And so when you have a situation where you're holding them back and they're giving concentrated grapes, well, they're going to rush to ripeness and have no flavor. Well, what do? Well, let's plant it further from the warm lake. There's even a winery on the other side of the Niagara Escarpment in the stateside called Warm Lake, or there used to be. And so it's like this warm lake far from the lake slows us down. So we're living on the summer sun up in Vineland and Beamsville.
Thomas, sorry to cut you off here, but remember, this isn't the school of cool. This is cocktail hour.
Okay,
since we're getting a little deep here, folks are sitting in their backyard sipping wine. How about this? Since you made wine in Burgundy and you made wine in Oregon and you obviously make wine in Ontario, give us where Ontario sits in that triumvirate of fantastic Chardonnay producing places.
You're right. I was digging down deep into how the suburbs go and give us minerality and a sense of place. So all of Niagara can do that. I think Niagara sits in a place where the limestone gives us a lift that none of us can really label limestone. Prince Edward County does that maybe a little better. We get maybe a little riper. When we're further from the lake, we get a longer season. That was what I was trying to say. When we sit against Burgundy with their old vines, and the vines having evolved there, we can sometimes look simple, but I think mostly we look a little fruitier and a little richer with still that great limestone finish. Whether you recognize it or not, it's there. Just the same way, whether you read about Chianti or not, you know what a Chianti tastes like if you drink enough of it. It has that signature of mid-Italy. We have a signature of a certain latitude and a certain limestone soil that makes it a very pleasurable experience, like Burgundy is. We're not as tight as them, but you know, maybe.
Would you agree with Andrew Jefford's statement from yesterday that, well, first of all, a region has to produce wines of enduring loveliness, vintage after vintage, and above all, deliciousness?
I totally agree with Andrew. I'd known him for a while. I met him when we were both journalists, and I said, I'm thinking of becoming a winemaker. And he said, and I'm thinking of staying a journalist. And I you know what? Thank God he did, and we wouldn't have changed the world much if I'd stayed a journalist. But I must say that he's absolutely right. Things have to be delicious first, but we mustn't fabricate drinks for people. Terroir is not interchangeable. You must recognize it as Chardonnay first, maybe, but where it comes from after. And that's what I was drilling down towards in the earlier, more long-winded portion of it. I think we're up there with Burgundy. I will always love Burgundy, and it's easy to be humbled in this industry. And if we can be in the shadow of Burgundy doing wines of a similar type, there you go. I'm signing on right now.
Beautiful. Well said.
Well said, Tom.
We can still love Burgundy, but we can love Ontario maybe a little bit more because we can afford a lot of these wines too, which is brilliant. Yeah. Thanks so much, Thomas.
And I was going to text you guys. I didn't get a chance, but I was going to say what you guys are doing by tasting wines internationally and then coming back, both of you, both the poet and the Zaz, both coming back to focus on area and go back and look at the world. I think that duality is very important, and don't give both up. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Thomas. Well said. Maybe let's bring in Patricia Todt. How's that? She's tuning in from Sicily. This is a terrific winemaker, friend of ours. I hope she's still there. Patricia Todt. Eat what? She's Hungarian.
Oh.
So I'm throwing a little Hungarian in there. If you could unmute yourself. Maybe she's gone back to sleep because it's going to be, 20 after 1 in the morning if she is in fact in Sicily or Budapest for that matter.
I believe she is in Sicily at this time. I think I saw her walking the vineyards of Noto the other day. I think.
Well, maybe she's given up on us once Thomas started getting deep into the sub-appellations there. She said, well, this could go on for a little while. Perhaps I will take a snooze and catch up with the boys in the morning. Let's move on to, how about Alan? Are you still out there? Alan Hallis.
Yes, I am.
Welcome. Welcome to the show. Not that we have a show, but this is our cocktail hour. Where are you tuning in from, Alan?
Mississauga, just down the road from Niagara.
Fabulous. Well, welcome.
So question for John. I loved your description of the 2007 Flat Rock Chardonnay when you opened it. And I was intrigued to know what you thought after you had tasted it, given that it was 13 years in the bottle.
Well, as I mentioned off the top, when I first opened it, it had that wonderful smoky, toasty wheat bread, honeyed sort of thing. And it hasn't really moved that far since. This is about an hour and a half ago since I first opened it. And it's evolving slowly. It's warming up. So, of course, the composition changes, but it's holding together beautifully. And this is something I love to do when I'm tasting a wine, evaluating a wine, reviewing a wine. Open it, taste it, but then stick it in the fridge and come back a day or 2 or 3 days later and just kind of follow it across its evolution. And it's a pretty good idea of how stable the wine is, how well it will age. And this is a trick you can try if you bought more than one bottle of any particular wine and you want to know how well it will age, because that's an important question that so many people ask, try this torture test of a wine. If after a couple of days it's oxidized, it smells like vinegar, all the fruit's gone, well, that's a wine to drink as young as possible. This wine was very obviously a wine that was delicious right off the top, but has aged really well, and it still has some potential. I don't think it's going to fall off the edge of the cliff anytime soon, given how stable it's been in the last hour and a half.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Patricia is here. You can try her again.
Hey guys.
Whoa. Hey, Sia, how are you?
See ya. I'm good. I was just slow technologically before. Sorry.
For those who don't know, Patricia, a fantastic winemaker, Hungarian origin, in Sicily with Planeta. Are you tuning in from Sicily right now?
I'm tuning in from Palermo, rarely. After a lot of months in the countryside, I just got tonight to Palermo, but then I had my agenda fixed on the meeting with i4C.
Well, you've been to a few i4Cs. We miss you dearly this time around, but thanks for tuning into our cocktail hour. You want to comment for us on Ontario Chardonnay, your experience tasting a few here?
Well, I was, you know very well that I was very ready to come back this year, completing it with a Canadian holiday, and then I wanted to do a proper, like a deep knowledge on the Chardonnay again after 4 years of lacking this experience, and then things has slightly changed, but I'm very much programming. The first thing I've put in my agenda for 2021 is i4C. So
well, we're all looking forward to getting together for i4C 2021. It's going to be third weekend in July. Yeah, even more.
Even more.
Let's say something for everybody out there that the Chardonnay that Patricia makes in Sicily, we would hardly think of as being Cool Climate Chardonnay, or many people would not. And so there actually was a question from John Matthew who said, can you describe a warm climate Chardonnay so we can understand the contrast? So I'm not asking you, Patricia, if your wine is cool climate or warm climate Chardonnay, but can you explain a little bit about how Sicily is misunderstood in people thinking that it's 35 degrees and sunny there all year long? It's not quite that.
That's a great question, thank you. But yeah, maybe it's not misunderstood, just that it's the step 2 now, because first I think it had to be repositioned in the world winemaking map. And now this is the moment when we can start to color a bit this picture, or sophisticate a bit this picture, and start to speak about the different terroirs what we have here. Obviously, we have certain vineyards which are 50 meters above sea level, and they are facing the southern side, so they are super sunny and super Mediterranean. But for example, our Chardonnay is being grown in 2 different spots. One is in 270 meters on a lake shore inland, so it's already quite cool, and the other one is right above in a very young plateau. It's 400 meters, between 400 and 500 meters, very chilled by winds coming from the sea. You know, when I came here for the first time 15 years ago, I came out from the ferry and I thought it was what we see from the touristic books, that it's a rocky inland, rocky burnt out inland and turquoise bays. And then I took my car and I drew up to these super green highlands. And I was like, is it Ireland or is it Sicily? So it's something which we don't really get as a detail yet, but it's our responsibility now as producers here to speak about these conditions. It's kind of like really a mosaic of terroirs around here. So you can produce a lot of types of wines. Chardonnay,
and certainly you know a lot about Cool making wine high up on the slopes of Mount Etna as well, because Planeta has an outpost there, and I know you struggle to get grapes like even Riesling ripe, and certainly local varieties.
Don't even speak about Fourmint, right?
We'll leave Fourmint aside for now.
Yes. No Fourmint and no Franco discussion here today. Promise.
Do you have any favorite memories from i4C or favorite Ontario wines that you recall tasting?
Well, also the whole Ontario experience for me was super, and then Newfoundland was also, and then Benjamin Bridge was for me a big discover if I can go out from Ontario. But the whole Ontario team, and also I was thinking today in the car about the appellation. I think that's a compliment which goes out for Ontario, that the appellation itself is super functional, and there is a very good teaming up of the producers. And I think that's something which from Europe has to be a big compliment to them.
Are you saying the appellations make sense when you say they're functional? Like there's a real difference between the different sub-appellations in, say, Niagara, or between Prince Edward County and Niagara?
That even maybe in a moment when the world is still learning about these wines, the appellation is already there, and the appellation itself is working and it's functional. That's super important, I think. And that's a fundamental thing for the future development of the area. So instead of one producer, my real compliment is going for the whole area and for the whole team of the producers there.
Well,
thank you on their behalf.
Great. Go Ontario producers, go. Yes, collegiality and togetherness is an important part for any wine region, Ontario included. The more that producers work together, the more the message gets out, the more the message is harmonized, so that, you know, people from outside can look in and understand what's happening. Everyone's working towards the same goal. So that's terrific. That's well said. Köszönöm szépen.
Köszönöm. I was happy to hear you guys.
Enjoy Palermo. The discos are probably just getting open again, but, you know, be careful.
Yeah, that's
wear
my classic.
Wear a mask.
That's my classic, you know.
Yeah.
I hardly kept awake to see you, so now it's my time to go to sleep. But big hug to Canada.
Okay,
thanks so much.
Presto.
Buonanotte.
Ci vediamo presto.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Well, there we have it. I think we've extended our cocktail hour here. We still got quite a few people hanging on, but thanks so much for listening till the end. Magdalena, are you there? Would you like to come on and say a little hello, goodbye? Michael, any final words?
Final words are just remember that i4C Cool Chardonnay Weekend does not end tonight. Enjoy yourselves tonight. Socially distanced, responsible, of course. But pick it up again tomorrow. There should be some Chardonnay in your glass for brunch tomorrow. Hopefully some sparkling, some bubbles. And, you know, at least kind of trying to linger with i4C well into the afternoon if you can.
You see, this is the moment of i4C I'm going to miss the most. This was the Sunday morning brunch at Ravine, the kind of wrap-up event for i4C every year. And they've got 3 ping pong tables out there. So every year it was a battle to the death on the ping pong table. I've won wineries, I've lost wineries, I've won fortunes, I've lost fortunes. Here's Jamie Goodenough, great English wine writer, playing some doubles in a match that I'm pretty sure we won something serious, but then we probably lost it the next year, so it doesn't matter. Anyhow, as Michael said, carry on the i4C weekend, carry on the love for Chardonnay, not just this weekend, but it is, after all, the world's most planted fine wine, white variety. It does make some pretty compelling wines in so many parts of the world, cool and warm, but hey, we're focusing on the cool ones here today. So with that, we're getting back our gear.
Thank you everyone for joining in. We really appreciate it and are happy to see you. Thank you, Professore. Thank you, Magdalena.
Grazie, Dottore, and to Wine Council of Ontario, VQA Ontario, Wine Marketing Association of Ontario, and all of the other fabulous sponsors and winemakers and wineries who provided these wines. Hopefully they still...
at the i4C Cool Chardonnay. Thank you, everyone.
See y'all next July, or hopefully sooner. So long.
In person.